Hey there, welcome back to the Complicated Kids podcast. I'm your host, Gabriele Nicolet. I am a toddler whisperer, a speech therapist, and a parent coach. And today I am very, very delighted to be joined by Veronica Alkon. Veronica, welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the invitation. It's super excited. Thank
I'm
you.
so excited to talk to you because I suspect that parts of what we're going to talk about today are going to be people will be nodding their heads, and then some of what we're going to talk about is going to be maybe unfamiliar. So we'll find out.
Yeah.
But would you tell the good people a little bit about yourself, the kind of work you do,
Yeah.
and that kind of thing?
Yeah. So hello, I'm Veronica and I'm in Sydney, Australia. And I have a 14-year-old boy who is the reason I am here talking to you today. It was his journey that led to me working this in need of support. And so, yeah, it's hard for me to, I guess, to talk about my work without talking about him and his story, because that's what leads to me landing in this space. But yeah, my work is with kids, teenagers, and women. And I work, it's really, it doesn't depend, the diagnosis is irrelevant to me. I'm interested in what the kids and the parents are presenting with, the challenges they're facing. That's what's most interesting to me, and what their body's doing is interesting to me, observing their bodies. So I guess my title is I work within the nervous system space of nervous system regulation. I call myself a nervous system whisperer, and I love that you're a toddler whisperer, Gabrielle. But I'm specifically working with the primary reflexes. So I'm working with motor patterns and sensory processing. And I landed in this work because of my son,
So tell us
right?
about your
So
son.
if I take you back,
Yeah,
yes.
tell us about him.
So he's 14 now. Yeah. So at age 3, we learned that he's got severe expressive and receptive language delays. And along with that, fine and gross motor delays, issues with balance, coordination, a little bit on the clumsy side. And from age 3, dental pediatrician, and his recommendation is speech therapy and occupational therapy. So very diligently, we did that almost on a weekly basis for 5 years. And always in the background, I was curious and never, satisfied. I guess I felt like we weren't seeing that much of a shift. The needle wasn't really moving enough for me, given the amount of effort going into it. So constantly researching, constantly talking to other parents, hearing their stories, hearing about other therapies and other methods, and bringing that information to my pediatrician each time, only for him to roll his eyes, dismiss me, or say that's just anecdotal, and then just keep doing what you're doing, it's all fine. Until there was one meeting with him where I walked in a happy parent with a happy child we just changed schools, and he was being a bit more engaging. This is like year 2, and he's finally like putting his hand up, feeling a lot safer in that classroom with that teacher. So we go to see the pediatrician, and I'm sharing the good news, change schools, he's doing so much better. And he tries to have a conversation with my son, and he's 7 at this by now. And my son's just like smiling and nodding, but not responding. And the pediatrician said, so he's still not speaking, right? And I'm like, well, he's not speaking to you right now. And he said, well, I think he's got silent autism and social anxiety, and I'm going to write you a script for an antidepressant because that's going to help him. So as a parent, I just saw red. And I walked out of there, and I said to my husband, never again, I'm never coming back. I walked in a happy parent with a happy child. How is it that I'm walking out with a new diagnosis and angry?
And
Right?
this story is
Yeah.
not uncommon. I have heard versions of this story from many of my clients, different parts of it, but elements of all of this, where medical professionals are prescribing medication and or so kind of rolling their eyes at parents whose gut is telling them there's something more here. Therapies being put into place, which is a fantastic thing, but also sort of an ignoring. And before we hit record, we were talking about this, and we're going to get into it in just a second. The state of the nervous system and the brain, which are the same thing. But we kind of by we I mean like speech therapists like me, occupational therapists, many physical therapists. We treat behaviors and we medicate behaviors, and we often don't look upstream and say, I wonder why that's happening. And so you are a person who was asking, I wonder why this is happening, yes?
Yeah, like there's got to be something else, right? So by then he'd also given us a diagnosis prior of motor dyspraxia, so a mental coordination disorder. So that had sent me already down another, rabbit hole of research. So I felt quite empowered already because of the amount of research I'd done on my own, all the conversations I'd had. And I felt like I'm just going to follow my gut now, and I'm going to navigate this, and I'm done listening to this person. So through a friend of a friend of a friend who puts me in touch with someone who lived in Canada, I end up on a phone conversation with a perfect stranger who's kind enough to take the time to take my call, whose son had a similar diagnosis. Sorry. And so we're on the phone, and she shares the fact that her son was using the Musgatova method, that they found a Musgatova method practitioner in Canada. So it's known as MNRI, the Musgatova Neurosensorimotor Reflex Integration Method. So she's like, give this a go. He kind of like fits that profile. I think it's going to be, it could be really effective. So long story short, we land on a 5-day intensive with this new method, and in 5 days, his language comes out. So this is 5 days of 30 hours of input, right? So it's not just 1 hour a day for 5 days. So each day they're working 50-minute slots, 6 different therapists focused on different areas. So one would be focused specifically on dynamic and postural reflexes. Another would be focused purely on tactile, on just like relaxing his nervous system, on just like calming the body down, allowing for sensory process to integrate. Another area would be oral facial work around integrating the reflexes of the oral facial, auditory and visual area. What else? Stress hormone release. So like every single 50-minute slot in the day was focused on a different area. Not once was he asked to say something or repeat a sound. So,
Now
so like,
I'm going to stop you there for just a second, because this is something that in the land of therapy and interventions, this is very contested, because there is a whole treatment school of thought that says you must get repetitions. You must work on speech in speech contexts, and you must work on walking in walking contexts. And that is true. Do not mishear me if you're listening to this. I'm not saying that that's not true. It is true, but it's not the whole story.
Yes.
And so what you're describing here is a modality that would be called, and you can add words here if you want to, holistic body work, nervous system driven. What are some other kind of buzzwords that people might hear regarding this type of modality, therapeutic modality?
Yeah, no, you're right. It's body work, it's manual techniques.
Manual. Yeah.
Yeah, there's exercises too. So, as you're teaching the body, you're giving the body the sensory input and teaching it the correct motor response for that sensory input. And then you're asking them through isotonic and isometric um, feedback to reinforce that new pathway that you've just introduced to the body. And then you put them on the floor and you're doing exercises to, again, because you're trying to myelinate and trying to, reinforce, as you say. So that was just, for me, it's like I expected to get more movement, more coordination, more balance. I wasn't expecting the speech to be the outcome, right? Just my ignorance. I think this is based on reflexes. I'm going to see more body. The body's going to look great.
And this is so interesting. Sorry, I know I keep cutting you off, but this is really interesting because we don't always associate this idea that speech and language will come in a more fluid manner when we remove some of the barriers to physical movement, to sensory processing, to balance. And my personal opinion is that brains are working so hard to just be upright in space that they will prioritize that. They will prioritize safety. They will which includes not falling down and bumping your head, right? Which includes not touching things that are yucky or that might be dangerous. And so then we're in such a retracted state that there isn't any bandwidth left over for expression, verbal or otherwise. And so this is kind of what you're talking about, right? With nervous systems being kind of in survive or thrive mode, I think is how you think about this, yeah?
100%. And developmental came first, right? So all these little so the primitive reflexes while we're in the womb, right? They kick in about 9 weeks of gestation. They start to come up to get the fetus and eventually the baby ready to come out the birth canal. And then once they're born, in Dr. Musgatova's research of 35 years, she's like, well, now we're in the primary phase of the reflexes, which is why she calls them primary reflexes. So that's the area where we're working in. And so if you look at that developmental journey, movement came first, right? And she would often say, speech is a nice to have. Before speech, you want to see a child whose movement is controlled and organized and purposeful and voluntary. If the body's still just reacting, if it lacks flexibility, you're gonna see issues and delays in development. So body first.
Can you just flesh this idea out for just a second? Because people talk about this a lot. Organized movement. Just give us a definition or an example for people who have heard that term and they're like, I still don't know what organized movement is. Can you help us?
Yeah, so I have lots of parents who say there's nothing wrong with my kids. Yeah, nothing wrong with movement. He's fine. He's moving. It's not reflexes because he's running and he's like, he doesn't stop. And I'm like, okay. There's dynamic reflexes and there's postural reflexes too. Yeah, so we're not gonna be able to learn and sit and focus and concentrate if our body is constantly moving. So we need the postural reflexes to be mature and well integrated also. So what does organized control movement look like? It's purposeful, it's intentional, it's symmetrical. It's they're not tripping over things, they're not bumping into things. They're capable of dressing themselves, using cutlery, or they can hold a pen. It's free and it looks, I guess, symmetric. I keep thinking of symmetry. They're crossing the midline would be another one. And we have all our archetype movements, which are the foundation also that run with the reflexes. So we've got the homolateral, bilateral, cross-lateral movements. It just looks orderly, I suppose. Yeah, not chaotic. Yeah, like I remember my son, like anytime I'm running, I'd be convinced he's going to run into the table or bump into something or trip over. Like it just didn't look like confident. The body didn't look confident. Didn't look safe.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know? Yep. And if it doesn't look safe, it doesn't feel safe at a subconscious level, right? They don't feel safe enough in their little bodies.
This
and
is
it's going to be hard to do much else.
It's so hard to do much else. And I totally agree that with Dr. Musgatova, like speech is a nice to have. If you don't have bandwidth for that, we're not talking. It's optional. It's completely optional. You can get your needs met. If you are a child, you can get your needs met without speech. That's just true. But there's also this, and I just had an idea and it flew out of my head. This notion of not feeling safe in your own skin from birth. When I pause to think about that, it really it brings me up short, because what must it be like to just expect that the world feels precarious? That is the opposite of what we expect and what we want from functional humans, yeah?
Yeah, I mean, I can speak a little bit around the birthing because I do feel like that would have played quite a big role in my son's story. It was an IVF pregnancy. I'll just flag that because I think that seems to be quite consistent with IVF babas. Even though I'm grateful he wouldn't be here otherwise, I do wonder if that was part of the story. The pregnancy was pretty nice. That was pretty. When my water breaks, we spot meconium. There's meconium in the water, right? So that's and from that moment on, my birth plan goes out the window. I was supposed to have an active birth. Next thing I know, I'm on the table, lying down, and they're like, no, we're going to monitor this baby until it comes out. You're lying down. I'm like, I did not plan to deliver lying on my back without movement. This is not going to work for me. But I had to go along with it, right, to keep the baby safe. So my body's in shock. I can't stop shaking from the pain. So I suspect baby's feeling the same way. Mm-hmm. The meconium, that toxicity, he may have ingested some of that. That would have been enough to cause a glitch in his nervous system. So then those reflexes that were supposed to get activated in that moment to push him out the birth canal, highly likely didn't quite activate the way they were meant to because of the stress of the birthing process. Yeah. So he ends up stuck in the birth canal for a couple of hours. They use the vacuum to reposition him, and then I can push him out, and then he comes out, and he looks perfect and healthy and strong. But I do wonder how much of his story goes back to that experience, and perhaps he gets stuck in that sympathetic state from that moment. Yeah. But there was such a huge trauma to the nervous system that perhaps he never quite gets out of that. And then his little reflexes miss out on the neurotypical development of those reflexes. And the other part to his story would be that between age 2 and 3, recurring middle ear infections, right? That's
very common.
Yeah, and then the other one that we don't learn until he's 8 is he had very high levels of mercury. Oh. They had mercury, lead, aluminium, but the mercury was particularly high. I, at the same time, get myself tested. I'm also high on mercury, and it turns out my mum's really high too, and sadly she's got dementia now. So the mercury, I'm thinking baby's already carrying a toxic load, which unfortunately he's got from me during pregnancy. Then you've got the stress of the birth. That's probably enough. Yeah. To cause him not to be able to, go through the normal developmental path.
Yeah. And listen, the specifics of this case are specific to this case, okay?
Yes,
And
100%.
part of the reason we're talking about this is because there's always there's always a really good reason for what we're seeing. We may not always know what that reason is, and sometimes it's not actually that important. Sometimes we just have to know and accept, this is what we're seeing. It's meaningful in some way. And I say that of external behavior, right? Of a child who's struggling at school, who's putting their head down on their desk. That is meaningful. It's not that they're bad or stubborn or lazy. There is a meaningful reason. It's probably nervous system related why they're doing that. In the same way, you've got this baby. Okay, so we know there are some reasons. And so you, because of your son, now are a Musgatova, an MNRI practitioner. Is that right?
Correct. Yes.
And so,
yes, but I want.
Yeah.
Can I say something to do with kid at school with the head on the table? So that if a parent came to me with that, I would go, I want to look at his ATNR reflex, right? So if they're not here, if they're here, that's the abdominal postural reflex, and that's the one that switches the brain off so you can sleep, right? So if their ATNR and their abdominal is mixed up, it's highly likely that every time they sit down and they slump in a certain on one of the two sides, highly likely that's why they're nodding off or unable to focus and concentrate. Highly likely their trunk extension or the spinal Perez reflex, which allows you to focus and concentrate, which is keeping me up right now. Something's up with that. So that's what I see consistently, right? So when parents come in with their list of this is what we're seeing, this is what they're saying at school, that's enough for me to go digging into those specific reflexes that are related to that posture or to that behavior or to that challenge in a particular area. It is linked to a reflex, and we're working with almost 30 reflexes. So yeah, it's like really fascinating. A lot of people work with reflexes, but Dr. Musgatova's work is 35 years of just looking at reflexes. So it's a very, very different, it's quite comprehensive, and there's several programs within that.
Yep.
So yes.
Amazing. Okay, so who do you work with now? And you gave us one example. Give us a. Do you work with littles?
My youngest at the moment is 3. Although I met a baby on the plane 2 days ago, so they might come to see me, and that's like really super cute. Like, and that's if we could get in that early, it would be amazing. If we could get in straight after the stress of the birthing process and correct what didn't quite, what's out. If we were doing that straight away, like imagine like.
Well, and there are countries where your baby is born, you take them to the osteopath and you have them adjusted.
Nice.
And that is far from reality here, where they kind of look at the baby, they're like, looks good, here you go. Go home.
Yeah, I know. So I've got age 3 all the way up to, I think I've got a lady in her 60s, but then I also work with my mum and dad who are in their 80s. So it's really anybody, because all of us through just life, our reflexes are going to fall out. Every time there's either physical stress or emotional stress, or there's been illness, trauma, even little trauma, the reflexes are going to come to protect us, but they can also get stuck there, especially if it's this like a chronic situation. And I think of school a lot because kids are constantly being exposed to that pressure, to having to keep up, and it's like every day, that's exhausting. And although the body's very clever and it's going to make compensations over the years can look like chronic fatigue down at the other end, right? They're going to be, there's like just no energy left anymore because every day is so hard. If you've got a little kid who struggles to get dressed in the morning, and if you've got motor coordination challenges, by the time they get to school, their tank's half empty, right? So there's going to be very little left for learning and paying attention. Like they might get to lunchtime, and after lunchtime, so there's nothing left. There's no adaptive energy left, and no physical. Like the mitochondria is only going to make so much energy.
Yep.
Yeah. So there's just I feel like teachers need to be educated in this space. I try, and they still look at me going, "We've never heard of that. I don't know what you're talking about."
But this is so interesting, right? You're talking about, so are you a physical therapist or are you just a Musgatova practitioner? What's your designation?
That's Musgatova. This was not my background.
Okay. Yeah. But here you are talking about mitochondria, which, if anybody remembers their biology, it's the powerhouse of the cell. Okay. And that's kind of as far as it goes. But it turns out mitochondrial function, hugely important to health, well-being, function of an organism. What are we but systems of, right? We are an organism comprised of systems. When a system is malfunctioning, now you got me like excited. when a system is malfunctioning, mitochondria, we're going to put as much as we can in there because we got to get through the day. We got to be upright. We got to support ourselves in gravity. Now someone's telling me I got to put a shirt on. Okay, I got to do that and wear my shoes. And now my backpack. And then this and then that. And then somebody said something at school that I didn't hear or didn't understand. And so I tried to pay attention more. And then I kind of wiggled because sometimes I've noticed that when I wiggle, I pay attention better. But then somebody told me to sit still. All of that is what we're talking about when we're talking about traumas, lowercase t, that over time create trauma, capital T, that create dysfunction and disease. Do I have that right?
100%. 100%.
And so wouldn't it be amazing if we got like your baby on the plane, or even your 3-year-old who's working harder than they need to and harder than they should right now. And that doesn't just go away.
No.
And so wouldn't it be nice if we would sort of apply these techniques? And again, this is not an endorsement of Musgatova per se, but it's more a way of thinking about bodies, about nervous systems, about brains that understands that the health of the whole ecosystem is at play.
100%. And I can see the little bodies come in and they're exhausted. Like they're falling asleep on my massage table.
Yeah.
Within like 5-10 minutes, they're like out. And I'm like, okay. Which can be a challenge when I'm trying to get them to, do some work. But that's okay. If we can release a lot of the tension in the body to begin with, and their first appointment, it has to be a positive experience. I want them to feel good. I want them to feel safe in my presence. And if I can, at the very least, in that first appointment, if I could just like release the tension in their bodies and give the nervous system just that, this is what safety feels like. This is what it feels like. And I remember saying that to one lady and she started crying. She said, I don't think my son knows what safety feels like. Or what feeling safe in his body looks like. I don't think he knows. I don't think he's ever peace. It was peace. I don't think he's ever felt peace. Yeah. So if I can give them at least that the first time, then.
Yeah. And when we feel, again, like, when we feel peace and safe in our own bodies, when we feel good in our skin, that is when we can function with other people. Like we cannot be working on social skills. I'm talking to you, speech therapists. We cannot be working on social skills with children who are in a state of fight, flight, or freeze. It will not work. Do not do it.
No, we only come out to engage with others once we've got that. We need to feel safe in our bodies first before we're going to go and interact with anyone else.
Yeah.
And you've got many kids who just safe, and perhaps they've got good reason for that. We don't know what experiences they've had because many of them don't communicate everything. My son always looked happy, and it was only years later that we learned that, you know, he was bullied in year 3. The camp in law was terrible. Like, he never shared that stuff with us. He always had a happy, he always looked happy. You know, in spite of all his challenges, he was a happy kid. But we didn't know that he was experiencing, you know, socially feeling isolated at school or being teased. That doesn't come out too much later.
Yeah.
So, which is like super sad because you're like, we didn't know that was going on.
Yeah.
So yeah, he's still a bit, you know, hyper vigilant around others, you know, because his life has taught him that kids can be mean and cruel.
Yeah.
So he's like, I'm not going to go trusting everybody, you know. He's like very protective, you know, and you get it, you totally get it. So yeah, we're working on it.
We're all working on something. Oh my gosh, Veronica, what a treat to speak with you. If people want to learn more about you and your practice, what should they do?
Thank you. So my website's called treatbodyandmind.com. On Instagram, it's Veronica_Alkon, and that's ALKON. Yeah.
Perfect.
Yes. That was really awesome. Thank you so much. And there's just so much to talk about.
I know. And this, I say this to most of my guests, and you're no exception. I could talk to you all day, and I happily would, but we're going to wrap it here. Until next time, thank you.
Really lovely to meet you.